Conference play officially begins this weekend as Kentucky and South Carolina do battle in Lexington. And we're here previewing, predicting, breaking it all down as SEC play gets underway. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Phillips. He's Dave Shumate. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us across all social media platforms as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. This segment brought to you by our friends over at RHOBACK. Go to RHOBACK.com. Use promo code SECU for 20% off your first purchase. That's RHOBACK.com, promo code SECU to get 20% off today. Kentucky and South Carolina open up conference play for the 2024 season and what feels like a bit of a must-win contest for both sides. We're here previewing, predicting, and breaking down this game, and helping me do so is my good friend, as always, Dave Shumate. Dave, what's going on, man? I appreciate you taking the time.
Now, I'm fired up for this one, CP. We've talked about this one all offseason. This is a must-win, I think, for Kentucky and South Carolina. Again, we talked about the Oklahoma State-Arkansas game earlier. You hate saying anybody's a must-win this early in the year, but it's the first conference opener for both these teams. For both teams, South Carolina probably legitimately going into the year until the Old Dominion game probably thought they're trying to go win 7-8 games. Kentucky, on the other hand, trying to get 8-9. These two teams don't really like each other. We know there's really no love lost between Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer, too. South Carolina's won 2 in a row. So you know Mark Stoops and the boys are going to be wanting to end that streak at home at the Kroger Field. They're also going to actually finish a game this week. Again, Kentucky's not finished a game. They've finished 3 quarters, but they have not finished a game. They only went 3 quarters. I forget what time they exactly ended that, but it ended up the 3. I think it ended up at the very end of the third, 31-0, then beating Southern Miss. But no, I mean, it's a big tone setter for both teams. You need to start. You hate starting off 0-1 in league play this early in the season against a team that you probably would put both teams would put in a similar tier to one another. It's not like Kentucky or South Carolina's opening up against Georgia. I mean, these are two teams battling for the same accolades, same tiers within the conference, trying to get in that 8-win range consistently, maybe 9. But I mean, South Carolina's going to have to come out. I think they will come in with a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder this week, because I think they're going to hear people like myself heading into it being like, oh, dude, they don't have a chance against Kentucky. They don't have a chance. And Beamer's one of those master motivators. Guys like to play for him. He kind of plays a little bit better when he's playing that little underdog role. So I'm sure they're going to be fired up. Hey, new season, guys, we didn't play well against Old Dominion, but you know what? We can start off 2-0, 1-0 in league play, and we couldn't script a better start to our season. Kentucky, on the other hand, hey, boys, like, these guys aren't coming in our house to make it 3 in a row. It's just not happening. Not when we have a veteran defense, 10 out of 11 starters back. The only guy we added on our team is a starting linebacker from Georgia, Jamon Dumas-Johnson. But I think this is another under-the-radar game, at least from a league standpoint, because one team's going to feel really good leaving Lexington, Kentucky on Saturday afternoon, and one team's going to be like, we could have a long road ahead of us, boys.
Yeah, to your point, Dave, it's always interesting when, not many games do you find on the calendar that it's the most important game of the season, realistically, for both sides. And I would agree with you, Dave. I would agree with you, Dave. I think for both sides to achieve their goals in this season, or even have an opportunity to realistically achieve their goals, this is one, you look at toss-up games on the schedule. This is one you absolutely need to have, whether you're Kentucky or South Carolina. Again, kickoff at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC at Kroger Field in Lexington. Dave, Kentucky in this one, a 10-point favorite. The over-under set at 42.5. That total has been plummeting from just yesterday. It was at 45, now down to 42.5. South Carolina leads this series all-time 20-14-1. They've actually won 2 in a row in the series as well. And the last meeting, of course, came last year. The Gamecocks won a thriller at Williams-Brice Stadium by a final score of 17-14. So, Dave, as we dive into this matchup, like I mentioned, and I want to hammer on this again, this is absolutely the most important game for both sides. Because, again, you're not going Kentucky. They've probably got dreams of an 8 or 9 win season. What is it, year 12, I think, or maybe year 11 or something of Mark Stoops. So it's, it's one of those things. They're at a crossroads, Dave, with what is the trajectory now of the Mark Stoops program, right? Last year he's complaining about NIL. He wanted to essentially leave for Texas A&M. He's back in the fold, obviously, this year. But, what is Kentucky football under Mark Stoops now? Which way are you going? You're going one way or the other. You're trending up or you're trending down. And then for South Carolina, I just don't see a path for them, Dave, to a bowl game without winning this football game. Like when you look at the difficulties that lie down the road, you've got LSU the following week. You play teams like Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Missouri, Clemson's on your schedule. When you look at their schedule and wins and toss-ups, I just don't think there's a path to 6 wins realistically unless you win this football game. And also, too, let's go ahead and put this out there, Dave. The sort of rivalry between these two sides, right? It started a couple years ago with the silly sunglasses comment from Mark Stoops, and Shane Beamer in South Carolina ran with it, the whole turn my swag on thing. And there's a lot of hatred here. I mean, you listen, Dave, you talk to Kentucky folks. Mark Stoops hates Shane Beamer, and Kentucky fans hate Shane Beamer and hate South Carolina. And another loss for Mark Stoops to South Carolina, the optics of that will not be good. So it is a pivotal matchup for both sides. And again, it's why we've been talking about, Dave, over and over. It is the most important game of the season because you just cannot hit your goals for either side unless you win this game.
I mean, to your point, CP, it's going to be tough for the loser to get off the mat. I know it's week 2. You got 10 more games after this. But in college football now, it's momentum-based, man. You got to have some momentum internally going. Or I mean, I saw some people, CP, a little off topic, but I saw some people tweeting, hey, like, what if Florida State lost to Memphis in a week and they're 0-3 and some of those kids start opting out to reserve a red shirt? Like, I was like, man, that's a little – that's not wild to think about. Kids
in this new era, not to cut you off, Dave, but in this new era of college football, when guys can opt out and those type of things, portal, it can go off the rails.
When there's nothing to play for? Yeah.
Quick. Because like the whole like playing for pride or playing for the team or playing for the name of
your future alma mater.
Some guys are doing that, but many are not. Many are not looking at it that way.
No, I mean, you're looking at – I got the South Carolina schedule right here. I just wanted to make sure. I feel like I knew it, but I wanted to read it off just to make sure I had it right. So Kentucky, then it's LSU the next week. I mean, you lose this game, and then LSU's going to come in as a favorite.
Dave, your first
– you're staring at 0-5 in the league right in the face.
Your first conference win may not come to November. Your first conference win.
Yeah, you're maybe hoping Vandy, who we saw Vandy this past weekend, Diego Pavia gives them an extra juice edge that Vanderbilt hadn't had. And if you know Vanderbilt and Clark Lee are going to be hungry for that first SEC win in a year or two. So, I mean, this is a big game for South Carolina. I mean, they know it. I mean, they're not dumb. They're rolling in there. And they probably feel confident. Like, we've beaten these guys the last 2 years. We beat them in their house 2 years ago. But no, I mean, this is a big tone setter for both of them. For, like you said, both of them to go reach what South Carolina probably realistically 6 wins. And Kentucky's probably realistically thinking they want to get to 8-9 wins in the regular season.
The big matchup, Dave, in this game, and I think the one that will define this contest, is the battle of the quarterbacks, right? Lenoris Sellers for South Carolina, the youngster, he goes on the road for his first ever career road start and conference start. And then you got Brock Vandagriff for Kentucky, who was solid in game 1, had an early interception. He overcame it. The offense hummed against Southern Miss. Again, granted, Southern Miss, but I mean, it's not like playing Pine Bluff or Alabama A&M.
Yeah.
You know, Southern Miss is a bit of a proud program, but he looked pretty good, but still, we don't really know what he's going to be. So the battle of the quarterbacks, Dave, what are you most excited to see? Again, Lenoris Sellers struggled in week 1 against Old Dominion. Could not throw the football. The passing game was non-existent. We know what he can do with his legs. He is a mobile quarterback. Brock Vandagriff, I think the ceiling from a throwing standpoint is probably higher, but he also brings a new dynamic to the Kentucky offense, which is running the football. So 2 quarterbacks that stylistically may be somewhat similar, although Brock Vandagriff, probably more weapons around him, will be able to deliver the football more so downfield. But it really does feel like, Dave, if you want to simplify it and dumb it down, whichever quarterback has a better day for their respective team, it's probably going to be the team that wins a football game.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be kind of a support cast around him that helps define that. What's going to be a successful day for Lenoris Sellers or Brock Vandagriff. It's going to start with both OCs, too. Bush Hampton, new OC coming over from Boise for Kentucky. We know Dow Loggins, the OC, who's been there now. This will be, his 3rd year at second year at Arkansas. I came over. Yeah, last year was his first year from coming over from Arkansas as the tight ends coach. But he's kind of a pass-happy. You throw Mike Shula helps in a little bit with that game planning. But it's also going to come down to the guys, their support cast on the offensive line. Because I think both teams have a massive – I think Kentucky's got a massive edge defensively against South Carolina's offensive line. And I think South Carolina right now, for what we know, all the information we have in our hand right now, South Carolina's got some guys on there. That's probably their best position group, the defensive line across the board. I mean, I think edge, the key I think will be is can guys like Kyle Kennard, who transferred over from Georgia Tech, can he get a pass rush? Can other guys?
Dylan Stewart, who was very impressive in week 1.
Dylan Stewart on the edge.
They need him to be a bit of a freshman phenom.
Tonka Hemingway as well. You're right. Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard are going to be the two guys to keep an eye on. And from a Kentucky standpoint, what can your tackles do? How do Marquise Cox? How does he survive on the left tackle? Jalen Farmer on the interior. We talked about Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, and then Gerald Mincy, the Tennessee transfer at right tackle. Kentucky's big blue wall hasn't been the big blue wall in about 2 or 3 years, and that's South Carolina's biggest strength rolling into this game. So if South Carolina, and that's probably why the over-under, the team total is so low. They're not expecting a lot of points. I don't either. That's going to be key. I think whoever protects their quarterback, puts their quarterback in the best possible situation is going to win this game. And I think some of it's outside the quarterback's hand a little bit because they can't protect. It doesn't matter what Lenore Sellers or Brock Vandegrift going to do. If Dow Loggins is too if he's too stubborn to change a little bit of his offensive scheme and what he personally believes to adjust to Lenore Sellers' strengths, that's going to be an issue. And then Bush Hamden, he's going to play within Brock Vandegrift's strengths. You're right. It's going to come down to the 2 quarterbacks, but I think the supporting cast around them. I mean, Kentucky led the league in drops last year for what's his name? Devin Leary last year started at Kentucky. So I think that's going to be improved. It will be. I mean, I think they have guys. Dane Key, Barian Brown, Jamori Macklin, the North Texas transfer, is a big-time player as well. Fred Ferrier, the UAB transfer. I actually like Kentucky's weapons on the outside much better than I like South Carolina's, which is to my final point. South Carolina's going to have someone on the edge, on the outside, step up and help Lenore Sellers as well. But I think both teams have major question marks up front, really. So I really think whatever offensive line and the combo of that, the offensive coordinator between Bush Hamden and Dow Logans, whoever kind of gets comfortable in what they're doing, I think that's going to carry over. And I think that's going to be the ultimately deciding factor on who ultimately wins this game in Lexington.
Dave, I want to go back to your point about the line of scrimmage, because if you watch, this is a very, very underrated, maybe under the radar SEC rivalry, right? Like these two sides don't like each other. This used to be just a one-sided affair until Kentucky went on, I think it was a 5 or 6 game winning streak in the mid 2010s. And, so it's become a much more competitive series. And Dave, if this is a series that you've watched, there's one thing that stands out every single year: physicality. Yeah. The more physical team at the point of attack wins this game every single time. That's why Kentucky was whipping up on South Carolina for those years for that winning streak. It just seemed like every single year with guys like Benny Snell and just, you mentioned the big blue wall, they were able to physically impose their will on South Carolina. And so to your point, I mean, that's really where this game, we talk about the quarterbacks. There's a lot of emphasis on them. You want to see what you got there under center, but that's where this game is probably going to be won and lost. It is in the trenches. And if you're going to get back to, if you're Kentucky, if you're going to get back to the big blue wall, it starts by pushing around a South Carolina defensive front that, again, Kennard shine, Stewart shine. You got Hemingway, you got Huntley. I'm still kind of wait and see on if South Carolina's defensive front is going to be like one of this top half of the league. It was Old Dominion, granted. Old Dominion, not terrible, but let's just see them do it in an SEC game is all I'm saying. So, but if you're going to establish that the big blue wall is back, you do it in conference play, Dave. This is when it matters. This is where we're going to find out who you really are, right? And on the flip side, I mean, it goes without saying, South Carolina could not protect the quarterback last year. They could not establish a running game. Dave, they were worst in the conference at 85 yards per game rushing in SEC play with Rocket Sanders and Oscar Attaway. To your point, you got to help out your quarterback.
And you saw, CP, it wasn't pretty against Old Dominion.
It wasn't. And Shane Beamer complained about perimeter blocking and the offensive line, the report there from folks of the offensive line. There's talent there for sure, so it was a little bit better. But again, this is where you're really going to find out, like how much strides have you taken on the offensive front? Perimeter blocking, from what they said, has got to get better. You've got to be able to generate some sort of running game to help your quarterback. That goes on both sides. I agree with you. I like the weapons Kentucky has offensively far better than I like South Carolina's. I predicted, Dave, coming in this season that this offense for the Gamecocks was going to be putrid. I didn't know it was going to be putrid against Old Dominion. I mean, you were down 19-16 in the fourth quarter against Old Dominion because you could not move the football. Let's call it for what it is. So, again, I think that matchup in the trench play, Dave, is going to be really interesting. And again, you mentioned the battle of the OCs, Dabble Loggins and Bush Hamden, the battle of these head coaches, Shane Beamer and Mark Stoops. They do not like each other. They do not. So I think this is going to be an intense contest, Dave. I think the game within the game, how they scheme each other up, is going to be really, really interesting. Because I think you go into this game, Dave, both sides knowing this is going to be a bit of a slugfest. It's going to be a little bit of a lower scoring game. Do we see anybody get risky and take some chances down the field? Barryon Brown, Dane Key. These are still really big play guys. And I think this is still a South Carolina secondary, Dave, you could argue, that if Brock Vandegrift gets some time, the big arm former 5-star, I think you could be able to, especially if South Carolina is selling out to stop the run. DQ Smith got cooked last week. I mean, you talked about this in the preseason. There's a little bit of a lack of athleticism in the back end. Speedsters like Brown and Key could definitely expose
that. Jamori Macklin kid from North Texas pretty good.
Yeah. I'm just curious to see like this chess match, the game within the game on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also another position that we're not talking about could help really from a pass protection and in the run blocking for
tight end.
Yep, the Caddis and Jordan Dingle. It'll be massive, and then throwing off play action to them, just getting stuff underneath. If South Carolina is losing in like the eye discipline, eye overall from a defense, if they're having bad eye habits from a defensive standpoint, that could be it too. Especially if Kentucky gets the run game going a little bit, and that's a little concern too, though. I mean, I'll say that from the Kentucky to the other side, the running back depth a little bit.
I mean, outside still out, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Demi, Sumo, Cognabe, I mean, when he transferred from where? NC State?
NC State,
I think. Yeah.
NC State,
but he's really kind of just the guy that they rode against Southern Miss. Granted, it wasn't a full game, but that's a little bit of a concern too. So I think that's where me and you were talking about. Brock Vandegrift's going to have to be implemented in the run game, and I think it will be key on the edges for Caddis and Dingle to seal those edges and be a part of the run game.
You mentioned the tight end position too, Dave. I think for South Carolina, Joshua Simon, getting him more involved. Yeah. Right now, obviously, there is a deficiency at wide receiver. We knew the position was a weakness going in the season, and it obviously is after 1 week. Getting Joshua Simon more involved down the field, I mean, that's a must, man. Maybe Brady Hunt as well, but Simon's that feature guy at tight end for an offense looking for explosive plays, looking for guys to step up, looking for weapons. Maybe you utilize the tight end a little bit more.
You're right. Watch both teams' tight ends. Yeah, because Simon was a top 5 impact player for me for South Carolina heading into the year. You're right.
Yep. Watch both teams' tight ends. All right, Dave, let's get into our predictions for this game. I'll start with this one. I love the under in this game. I think this is going to be low scoring. I'll tell you this, guys, when it comes to South Carolina games, you're probably going to want to hammer the under a lot. I don't think this offense is very good. I think Lenoris Sellers is a really, really talented player, and I think that Lenoris Sellers, could be a bright spot for South Carolina. 2 new quarterbacks. You're asking the youngster to go on the road, Dave, in what'll be a pretty hostile environment at Kroger Field, I think, and go pull out the win. Listen, week 1 overreactions, Dave, be damned. And I don't want to overreact to what we saw against Old Dominion because we've seen South Carolina before play down to their competition, and then the next week, inexplicably, they go out and win a game or they play a top 10 team, and it's a game in the fourth quarter. That being said, there's a lot to be encouraged about defensively. You mentioned the defensive front. Kennard, Dylan Stewart is a real dude for them. Debo Williams at linebacker. They had a breakdown in the secondary, and that may be an issue as we go throughout the season, but the defense, I think, is better than it was last year. My concerns with South Carolina and the matchup I'm concerned with for them, offensively facing off against Dave, what I think is one of the better defenses in the conference. And I think it's a very underrated defense. They've got dudes at all 3 levels. It starts up front with Deion Walker and Octavius Oxendine. You go to the second level with Jamon Dumas-Johnson at the linebacker spot. You've got Maxwell Hairston at corner. I just don't see how South Carolina is going to move the football.
Yeah.
I said it coming into the season, they were going to have issues offensively. They are extremely weak at wide receiver. They do not have playmakers on the outside. The offensive line, I'm still not sold that they're going to be like a top half of the league unit. Rocket Sanders is a nice player. We know that. Oscar Attaway is a really nice, number 2 punch to be there with Rocket in the backfield. I agree with that. Lenoris Sellers, a lot of talent, but he is drinking water out of a fire hose right now, trying to put this team on his back. I think Kentucky knows that. They are going to attack him all afternoon long. And Dave, you know what a young quarterback does when he's feeling the pressure and he's trying to put the team on his back? He makes ill-advised throws, and he makes bad decisions. And I think Kentucky's going to force that. I think Lenora Sellers, this is probably the game you see him throw a pick or two, maybe 3. I think Kentucky's defense is going to feast. I don't think if you're Kentucky, you have to do a lot offensively. Just don't make any back-breaking mistakes.
Bad turnovers, yeah.
I don't make any back-breaking mistakes. I think Kentucky will hit a couple explosives down the field with a Key, with a Brown. I like Dingle, the tight end, like you mentioned. And I think the big blue wall, I think they've been hearing all offseason about, it's can Kentucky get back to this? We've all been asking the question about their identity. I think we see Kentucky's identity in this game. Again, I think for this game, I think early on we could have some tense moments, but Dave, I think Kentucky is going to run away with this thing late. I don't think South Carolina, I'm not a believer in their offense. They lack playmakers. They lack explosiveness. And, oh, by the way, they're taking on a really, really good Kentucky defense. So I think Kentucky will suffocate South Carolina on the defensive side. I think offensively, Brock Vandagriff will be solid. I think his mobility will be a difference. They hit a couple explosives in the offensive side. I think Kentucky gets the win. Lock me in. Wildcats 23, South Carolina 10, in a game that I expect to be low scoring, hammer the under. And I think Kentucky, too, after losing 2 straight to South Carolina, they're going to be fired up. They've had this one circled. They know they have to protect their home field and get this one. And I just don't think South Carolina is going to have an answer.
Yeah, I think Kentucky's going to win 24-13. I mean, I was one of the few. I almost took Old Dominion last week in the points. I was a little worried if I was South Carolina. I know a lot of people weren't. A lot of South Carolina fans weren't. But I think South Carolina's got major issues offensively. I think they have a coordinator in Dow Loggins, who does not really him. It's similar to a little bit Colin Klein, Connor Wigman. It's just not a real marriage. Loggins does not really want Lenore Sellers as his quarterback. It really doesn't fit what he wants to do. He wants a Spencer Rattler, obviously. He wants to go through the ball 35-plus times every game with his quarterback. The offensive line just can't get going. There's not a real threat on the outside. I do think on the other side, though, I think early in the game, I think South Carolina's edge rushers, like you mentioned, Dylan Stewart, and them, I think, are getting Kyle Kennard, are going to have an impact against Kentucky. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, maybe even 0 points scored in the first quarter. I think it's going to be a very low-scoring game. I think both teams are going to fill each other out. Again, like you said, both teams are going to be, okay, let's just don't go try to lose it. Let's just don't let our quarterback lose the game. Let's don't give them a short field. Let's don't let them score without their offense even being on the field. Let's don't go give them a pick six or anything like that. Low-scoring affair. I just think ultimately at some point, Kentucky, Bush Hampton start to put it together. Again, I'm with you. I think the tight ends, Jordan Dingle, Josh Caddis, are going to be key in the passing game and on that perimeter run game for South Carolina, for Kentucky. Maybe even some jet sweeps with Barry and Brown, Dane Key, and Macklin, maybe to get on the edges as well. I think they'll have a key as well, or they'll have a big impact as well from a tight end standpoint. I'm with you. I just think at some point, I trust Kentucky's offense more than I trust South Carolina's inept offense as well. I mean, if Old Dominion's living in the backfield, that Kentucky defense that has one of the better fronts, I think, in the league, is going to have a field day, especially at home. Like you mentioned, in Lenore Sellers' first road start. Give me Kentucky 24-13. I think they barely cover, and I'm with you. I'll take the under.
And Dave, to your point in closing, I mean, I had Kentucky winning this game in the offseason before South Carolina struggled with Old Dominion and beat them by 4 points. So I just, you don't want to overreact to week one, but at the same time, what we saw is what we saw. And it will be, I don't want to call it a shocker, but it will be quite a surprise if South Carolina goes into Lexington, the offense is clicking, and they pull out this win. I mean, I just don't see it. And I know you don't either. So, guys, again, do you agree or disagree with us? Kentucky and South Carolina doing battle at Kroger Field to kick off SEC play. Who comes out on top in this must-win contest in Lexington? Guys, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get those as well. You can also find us across all social media platforms as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. For Dave Shumate, I'm Chris Phillips. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in, and we'll catch you on the other side.